The footage from the security camera froze at the exact instant she clipped through the fence with bolt cutters. In her other hand, she casually held a champagne flute, gleaming in the light like some twisted prize. I stared at the screen in disbelief, while the audio played back her voice clear, unapologetic. "No one even uses this dumb field," she scoffed. "Might as well enjoy it." She laughed, tossed her perfectly styled blonde curls over her shoulder, and waved her guests through the gap she just made in my reinforced fencing. That barrier wasn't ornamental, it was the only thing separating my property and the three bulls at Alzida from absolute mayhem. And she didn't have the faintest idea. What made it even more outrageous was that her little gathering had turned into a full-blown HOA spectacle. A DJ had set up, lights blazed, all drawing power from my backup generator. Children ran wild, folding tables overflowed with drinks. Wine glasses clinked cheerfully just 50 yards away from Diesel, Bruiser, and Tango. One misstep, one loud shout, one scare, and it would all collapse into chaos. I stood frozen in the barn office, hoping I was just exhausted and imagining things. It had been a long couple of days. I'd just gotten back from Amarillo, where I'd spent the weekend demonstrating bull handling techniques to law enforcement. These weren't regular livestock. Diesel had riot control training. Tango had been conditioned in a military livestock unit to respond calmly to crowds. And Bruiser, oh well, his name said it all. He didn't like strangers. He barely tolerated me. Their enclosure was no accident. Triple reinforced gates, electrified perimeter fencing, every precaution in place for a reason. A single mistake could lead to disaster, and Karina, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had taken bolt cutters to it like it was some neglected backyard fence. Because she thought my land made a pretty backdrop for her party, I didn't move right away. I just watched her saunter past the fence line, followed by a trail of guests like some misguided parade. No permit, no invitation, no comprehension, just a patch of grass, in her eyes. But for me, it was the barrier between peace and pandemonium. Then something on the monitor made my blood run cold. A young boy, maybe 7 or 8, had chased a balloon beyond the tables. He was now only feet away from the interior bull gate. My stomach dropped. That gate wasn't meant for pressure or contact. Any shaking or climbing could trigger a response. The bulls had been trained to react to erratic movement. Fast ones, noisy ones, the kind that looked a lot like children playing tag. I didn't waste another second. I tore out of the office and sprinted toward the barn, boots pounding against the packed dirt. My mind raced with scenarios. There wasn't even time to call the sheriff. First, I had to check the bulls. If they were calm, maybe I could still lock everything down in time. But as I got closer, I heard Ina Tango's steady, low snort, a sure sign he was already unsettled. Then Bruiser's hooves shifted, giving off a deep, vibrating rumble. Inside the barn, Diesel stood alert at the gate, ears strained forward, gaze locked. He looked like a soldier waiting for orders. They knew, not just the noisy, they sensed the breach. People don't give bulls enough credit, especially trained ones. They know when routines change, and when they do, they get ready. The main gate was still holding, but I spotted something that made my jaw clench. One of the padlocks had been tampered with, scratched and off-kilter. Someone had tried to force it from the outside. A few crushed strawberries nearby told the rest of the story. Someone had even tried to feed them. It was beyond careless. It was dangerous. I darted to the control panel to check the fence's power status. Then came the second shock. An alert flashed on the screen. Auxiliary generator engaged. Power rerouted. Someone had tapped into the backup power, probably the DJ with his flashy light Riga, and overloaded the circuit. Which meant one critical thing. The electric fence that kept the bulls back. It was offline. Now, all that stood between Diesel and a cluster of partygoers was a single gate latch. I grabbed the remote recall device and a pouch of training pellets. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for disaster. If I moved fast, I could coax the bulls back into the inner corral and resecure the area. But when I rounded the corner and reached the open field, I saw Diesel had already slipped through the gate. He wasn't charging yet. He just stood there, head lifted, sniffing the air, ears twitching in time with the beat of the music. The crowd remained blissfully unaware. They laughed, posed for selfies, clinked glasses beneath string lights taped between trees. Karen stood front and center with two real estate agents and what looked like a local councilman, raising her glass mid-toast. Something about transforming this forgotten field into a future community park. My land, my animals, my fencing, all treated like props for her social climb. Some of the guests began to notice Diesel, pointing and whispering. A few even thought he was part of the spectacle. From the tree line, I watched with my pulse racing as a small girl stepped toward him, arm outstretched to pet him. She moved slowly. Diesel snorted, tossed his head, and stampeded hard. The ground shook with a warning. Some guests flinched. One screamed. Finally, Karen turned and saw him. Her jaw dropped, but only for a second. She quickly grabbed the DJ's microphone. "Everyone stay calm," she announced. "It's all part of the show." My dear neighbor Mason brought out one of his adorable bulls to join the festivities. Adorable? Diesel. This wasn't some petting zoo attraction. This was a 2,000-pound animal trained to neutralize threats. And he was 2 seconds from doing exactly that. I stepped out into the open, lifted the whistle to my lips, and blew a sharp, high-pitched blast. Diesel froze mid-step, his ears swiveling toward the sound. I followed up with a second whistle longer, with a rising pitch. He gave a loud snort and turned toward me. Bruiser and Tango appeared behind him, picking up on the shift in tone. That was a good sign. I still had their focus for now, but it was fragile. One unexpected sound, one panicked move from the crowd, and it could all fall apart. Karen, of course, kept talking. "Aren't they amazing? So obedient," she gushed. "Honestly, I might get one myself." A beats a guard dog. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Some guests began drifting slowly toward the open gate. The DJ, completely oblivious, queued up some dreadful EDM remix of a country song. Then Diesel did something I hadn't anticipated. He began walking a deliberate, slow directly toward Karen. He wasn't charging, just moving like a living tank with a mission. Karen's smile faltered. "All right, very funny, Mason," she called, voice strained. "You can call him off now." But Diesel kept coming, stopping just inches from her table. He lowered his massive head, sniffed the row of champagne flutes, then casually tipped them over with one powerful nudge. Glass shattered. Guests shrieked. Karen stumbled back and landed squarely in her own buffet table. I raised the whistle and gave 3 short blasts. Diesel halted. Bruiser and Tango flanked him instinctively, forming a triangular stance. I walked forward slowly, every step sending a clear message. This was no act, this was no performance. It was a barely managed emergency. When I reached them, I placed a hand gently on Diesel's side, then turned to Karen, now sprawled on the ground, her white dress stained with barbecue sauce. She looked up at me as if I were the one who had lost control. "You trespassed," I said, voice low but firm. "You cut through my fence. You put children at risk. And the only reason no one's hurt is because these animals respect my commands more than you respect anyone's property." With that, I guided the bulls back toward the barn, not saying another word. But I already knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't Donia and neither was I. The quiet after I latched the gate didn't last long. I heard the clatter of heels against gravel and turned to see her stomping toward me, dress rumpled and filthy, one heel broken off and clutched in her hand like evidence in a courtroom. Her face was streaked with mascara and rage. "You endangered my guests," she screamed, jabbing the heel toward my chest, right where my fire-resistant vest still sat under my jacket from earlier that day. I just stared, blinking slowly. The audacity was hard to process. She had trespassed, damaged an electric fence, thrown an unauthorized event, and now she was blaming me. I didn't speak right away. It wasn't that I lacked a response, I had too many, and none of them would make a dent in Karen's self-delusion. Behind her, the scene was unraveling. The DJ had begun packing up. Guests were leaving in clusters, some muttering on phones, others inspecting their shoes for manure. A few paused to watch us, clearly waiting for the showdown. Karen, noticing the attention, raised her chin and announced loudly, "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the HOA about your behavior." That broke my silence. I let out a low, tired laugh, of the kind that slips out when reality turns absurd. "You're going to file a complaint?" I said, brushing dust from my palms. After slicing through my fence, inviting a crowd onto private land, hijacking my backup power, and putting people kids next to trained bulls, her eyes narrowed like I'd insulted her intelligence. Which, honestly, I kind of had. "They're animals," she snapped. "You can't just keep wild bulls next to a residential neighborhood." I kept my tone calm. "They were in a secured enclosure, a system built to keep the AMA and everyone else here safe. Until you broke it." I pointed toward the torn-open fence, still draped in party streamers fluttering in the wind. "You caused this, and you're lucky they didn't respond the way they're trained to. If Diesel had charged, you'd be picking potato salad out of your hair and drinking from a hospital straw." She paled for a second but held her ground, too far into her righteous fantasy to back off now. "Well," she snapped, "maybe someone should have warned the hoe. How were we supposed to know you had killer cows locked up next door?" "That did it." "They're bulls," I corrected, voice sharp. "And they're not killers. They're professionals, better trained than the people who'll be dealing with the lawsuits this mess could have caused." That finally shut her up for a second. Then one of her guests approached, a tall man, suit jacket off, tie loose, looking like he regretted showing up at all. "Karen," he said cautiously, "you told us you had permission to use this land." She stiffened. "Well, Mason and I have always had a cordial relationship," she lied, glancing nervously at me. "And this land's not even being used. It's mostly decorative." I folded my arms. "That decorative land," I said, "is a federally certified livestock training site. Those bulls participate in security drills and demonstrations. You just threw a wine party next to a Homeland Security asset." She blinked rapidly, trying to read my expression. "You're bluffing." "I'm really not," I replied, pulling out my phone. I showed her a photo taken just 3 weeks prior of me and Diesel at the Security Expo, a Homeland Security official shaking my hand beneath a banner verifying everything. The man in the loosened tie took a visible step back. "I think I should call my office," he mumbled, already turning away. Behind him, a woman quietly began folding her table, clearly fed up with the spectacle and with Karen. "Wait," Karen called after them, her voice rising with desperation. But more guests were already packing up and leaving, driven by embarrassment, guilt, or sheer second-hand humiliation. She turned back toward me, red-faced and fuming. "You set me up," she spat. "You planned this just to ruin my event." I blinked, stunned that she could twist reality so completely. "Karen," I said, "you wrecked your own event the moment you decided bolt cutters gave you authority." Muttering under her breath, still clinging to that broken heel like a courtroom exhibit, she stormed off. I spent the next hour checking every gate, every latch, every sensor. One by one, I walked the bulls through their drills to help reset their nerves. Diesel, as always, carried himself with more patience and dignity than most people. When I refilled the feed trough, he leaned gently against my shoulder like he understood the insanity of the day. "You deserve a medal," I murmured, rubbing his head, "or at least a fence that's Karen-proof." That night, I went over the footage, every angle, every sound, a crystal clear recordings of her cutting the fence, her guests flooding in, and the DJ tapping into my emergency system. I copied everything onto a secure drive. I didn't know what Karen might try next, but if she came at me with legal nonsense, I wanted every second of evidence documented and ready. The next morning, before I even got through my first cup of coffee, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Messages from neighbors poured in, some apologetic, some just stunned, and a few laughing harder than I had the energy for. But one message stood out, a link to a video. Someone had filmed Diesel tipping over the champagne display and Karen toppling into her own buffet. They'd added slow motion, dramatic music, and a narrator saying, "This is why you don't mess with Bulsa or boundaries." I watched it twice, then laughed so hard I spilled coffee down the steps. The video was uploaded anonymously, and it had already racked up 10,000 views overnight. The comments were ruthless and glorious. People nicknamed Karen Champagne Stampede and Fence Cutter Supreme. Others called Diesel a performance artist of justice. It wasn't just viral content, it was proof. Karen had built her whole reign on intimidation, filing petty complaints about everything from grass height to garbage bins. But now she'd crossed into territory she couldn't manipulate or control, and the entire community had witnessed it. That afternoon, I got a call from Officer Gaines, a county deputy who'd worked livestock events for years. Caught the footage. He chuckled. "That bull of yours ought to have a badge." "You planning to press charges?" I paused. "Not yet," I replied. "Let's see what Karen tries next." Because if I knew anything about Hira, and unfortunately, Idita, it wasn't over, she wouldn't disappear quietly. She'd find a way to spin it, to play the victim, to threaten legal action. But I was ready. What she didn't realize yet was that she'd accidentally turned my bulls and my fence into folk legends. And when you go viral for nearly getting trampled by a 2,000-pound security animal, your whole throne starts looking mighty unstable. 2 days after the party fiasco, I received a formal notice from the HOA, signed in bold ink by Karen herself. She was officially filing a complaint against me. According to her letter, I had created a hazardous environment adjacent to shared community space and intentionally provoked panic through the use of aggressive livestock. I read it 3 times, mostly out of disbelief. She had somehow flipped the entire disaster on its head and painted herself as the victim. Her language was dramatica, full of buzzwords like minor traumatic stress, alarming animal presence, and unsecured perimeter resulting in public endangerment. One line even claimed her guests thought the bulls were ornamental lawn decor until they moved. I laughed out loud. Diesel would have taken offense to that. That afternoon, I drove straight to the HOA facility, not because I expected fairness, but because I wanted to watch Karen's face when I handed over the receipts. I wasn't in uniform, but I came prepared. I brought every relevant document, my livestock certifications, registration paperwork, a printout of the federal guidelines for livestock-based security operations, and a highlighted section of state law outlining the rights of agricultural landowners. Most importantly, I brought a thumb drive loaded with surveillance footage at 3 camera angles, all showing Karen cutting the fence, inviting in the guests, and my bulls entering the field while she stood at the center, too busy speech-making to notice the danger she had unleashed. The receptionist stared as I handed it all over. "This is a lot," she murmured. I nodded. "It really is. You might want to start around the 12-minute mark," I told the receptionist. That's when she plugs the DJ gear into my emergency power grid. I was nearly at the door when I heard a voice whisper behind me, "Is that the bull guy?" I didn't reply, just gave a nod and kept walking. I hadn't intended to become neighborhood folklore, but clearly, fate had other ideas. That evening, one of the local Facebook groups lit up with a post titled, "HOA Chair vs. Bull Money, Who's Really to Blame?" It had more comments than anything else posted in months. Half the neighborhood had turned on Karen. The other half was just there for the drama. My personal favorite was from someone named Linda J., who wrote, "Anyone holding a mimosa while wielding bolt cutters shouldn't be allowed to run in HOA." By the next morning, Karen's carefully crafted version of events had started to unravel. Turns out several of her guests, angry about ruined shoes, stained clothing, and destroyed centerpieces, had gone straight to the HOA. And they weren't just annoyed. Some of them had been under the impression the event was officially backed by the HOA. Karen had claimed it was a community function, that the costs were covered. One guy said he'd handed her $500, thinking it was a fundraiser. Another revealed he'd hired the DJ based on Karen's assurance that the land had been donated for the event by the friendly cowboy next door. That cowboy, of course, was me. And I had been completely in the dark right up until my bulls nearly turned her charcuterie table into a battlefield. Now, people wanted answers, and Karen had none. Then came an unexpected twist, a call from my insurance provider. Apparently, someone had filed a claim alleging my bulls had attacked and injured party guests during an unauthorized event. But when I spoke to the rep, she was already laughing. "We've reviewed the footage," she said. "Your animals showed more restraint than half the humans there. We're denying the claim." Whoever submitted it had included a poorly cropped video and some shaky witness statements, but the original viral footage told the real story, and it had spread far and wide by then. It was obvious who the trespasser was. Things escalated further when Officer Gaines rang me up again. "Hey, Mason," he said, sounding somewhere between amused and exasperated. Thought you'd like to know. A Karen came in this morning trying to press charges against you. I nearly dropped my mug. On what grounds? She claims you weaponized your bulls, said you used them to intimidate her, said it was premeditated. I couldn't help but laugh. I used a whistle. They're bulls, not commandos. Exactly what I told her, Gaines replied. Then she started rambling about psychological warfare. One of the deputies had to leave the room to keep from laughing out loud. We're not filing anything, but be prepared. She's unraveling, and unravel she did. Over the next few days, Karen went into overdrive, campaigning like she was running for office. She tried to convince the HOA board to formally censure me for endangering the community. But more than half the board members didn't even bother showing up to the emergency meeting she'd arranged. One of them, Sandra, quietly emailed me, "Just so you know, we're organizing a vote to remove her." You didn't hear it from me. Karen, meanwhile, was clearly cracking. She began dropping passive-aggressive flyers into mailboxes warning of livestock dangers in suburban neighborhoods. She also started nitpicking neighbors' fences and pet permits like it was her full-time job. She had overreached, and the rest of the board was scrambling to disassociate themselves from the disaster she'd created. That same week, I got a call from a producer at a local morning show. "We loved the video," he said. "We'd like to do a segment on responsible animal handling. The community loves those bulls." Think of it as educational with a little flair. TV appearances weren't really my thing, but I agreed to let them film a short segment out near the pasture. Diesel and Tango were naturals in front of the camera. Bruiser mostly ignored the whole production, which somehow made it even better. The piece aired 2 days later and became an instant hit. They even added a slow-motion replay of Diesel tipping over the Champagne Tower, calling him America's classiest bull. Suddenly, the property everyone once dismissed was now being recognized for safety, professionalism, and responsible livestock management. And that was Karen's next big problem. Now her party guests had seen the truth. I wasn't some eccentric recluse with rogue bulls. I was a certified trainer, backed by state law, respected by law enforcement and now the media too. Her entire complaint relied on painting me as reckless. But now, she just looked ridiculous. And then, the final nail. Someone leaked internal HOA emails. It turned out Karen had submitted a reimbursement request for the party, claiming it as a community engagement initiative. The expense report included table rentals, catering, and equipment that IASA was plugged into my emergency power system. She'd tried to get the HOA to cover the cost of her unauthorized gala using the maintenance budget. The fallout was immediate. An emergency vote was scheduled within a week. And when it happened, nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. Residents weren't just angry, they were done. They wanted accountability. Karen arrived dressed for church and tried to spin it all as a misunderstanding. "I just wanted to bring people together," she said, trying to sound sincere. "That's what community is about." Then someone from the back of the room stood up and shouted, "Community doesn't bring bolt cutters." The place erupted. Her charm offensive had failed completely, especially once several residents stood up and confirmed they'd paid her directly for tickets to what she'd claimed was an HOA-sanctioned event. A week after Karen was removed from the HOA board, things finally began to settle, at least on the surface. The neighborhood was breathing easier. No more passive-aggressive flyers, no surprise inspections, no dramatic outbursts during community meetings. I could walk the perimeter of my field and check on the bulls without worrying someone had snuck in to snap selfies with a 2,00-pound animal. But I knew Karen wasn't gone. People like her don't retreat, they regroup. So, when a box showed up at my gate with no return address and a note taped to the top that read "Compliments of the community," I didn't get my hopes up for cookies. Inside was a pile of shredded flyers, defaced photos of my bulls with red X's drawn over their faces, and a fake legal notice threatening a lawsuit for ongoing intimidation via dangerous livestock. It was printed on cheap paper and clearly homemade. I chuckled, but not because it was funny. It was that dry, tired laugh you let out when you know trouble's circling back. Karen was poking the bull again, figuratively, for now, and I wasn't about to let it slide this time. Dragging it all through court wasn't my first choice, but I wasn't about to let her build another false narrative, either. So I reached out to a neighbor who worked in the county records office. A few days later, He handed me a file thick enough to warrant a rubber band. Karen's name popped up again and again. She'd been the complainant in multiple nuisance reports across Tona, none of which ever held up under review. This wasn't a one-off meltdown. It was a well-documented pattern. Still, I didn't want a court battle. I wanted something smarter, something public, something that wouldn't give her any ammo but would make a statement. Then the idea came to me. The bulls didn't just need stronger fencing, they needed a spotlight. So I decided to host a live demonstration, and not just about safety protocols, but a full-on community showcase. I wanted to show people what these animals were actually trained for, what they were capable of, what they weren't. I sent invitations to every neighbor, community leader, and media contact I had. Even reached out to the morning show producer who'd run the viral story. She was all in. "Let's call it the Bull Protocol," she said. "Live training, public safety, and a hometown hero in a cowboy hat. It's perfect." The week leading up to the event was a blur. I groomed the bulls, repainted the signage, set up a temporary viewing platform, and ran through the drills. Diesel, Tango, and Bruiser could sense something big was coming. They were alert, ready. I wore my old rodeo vest, freshly shined boots, and the same wide-brimmed hat I'd worn during my last security deployment. But this wasn't a show, it was a message. Guests started arriving around 10 a.m. By 11, nearly 80 people had gathered, families, reporters, city council members, even a few curious teens who looked like they'd wandered over from the high school. One of the HOA board members handed out folding chairs and lemonade. A drone buzzed overhead, capturing aerial footage. At exactly noon, I stepped onto the field and raised my hand. The crowd quieted instantly. "Thanks for coming," I said. "By now, most of you have seen the video. You've heard the rumors. You've met the bulls at least online. Today, I want to show you what they're actually trained to do." With a single whistle, Diesel stepped forward and stopped on a marked line. Another whistle, and Tango moved into position on his right. A third, and Bruiser joined them. They stood steady, alert, perfectly calm. I gave a series of commands, some verbal, some signaled. The bulls responded like clockwork, shifting, backing up, forming a wedge. Every move precise, deliberate, coordinated. The crowd was locked in. A news anchor whispered into her mic, "This is more choreographed than most halftime shows." Then came the finale. I stepped toward a mock intruder, set up a mannequin in a red hoodie holding a plastic bat. With a single signal, Diesel moved forward, slow and steady, stopping just inches away. A second whistle sent Bruiser into motion, circling wide. With a grunt and a nudge, Bruiser knocked the mannequin clean over. Gasps rippled through the audience. It wasn't aggression, it was control. It was training. And it was impressive. As the crowd applauded, I raised my hand once more. "This kind of precision takes years to train," I said. "These animals aren't pets, and they're certainly not wild threats. They're certified, purpose-trained livestock used in safety demonstrations across the state. They do not attack unless provoked or commanded, and they've never been loose. Not on Sia until someone else cut through a locked fence." That line hit like a thunderclap. A few heads turned toward the back, where Karen stood, arms folded tight, sunglasses on, visor pulled low. She looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. She had shown up. Of course she had, probably hoping something would go wrong so she could say "I told you so." Instead, all she saw was flawless execution, a broken bar, and a community that wasn't buying her story anymore. By the time I stepped up to the podium, the crowd no longer believed the word Karen said. "I'd like to invite Officer Gaines to say a few words," I announced. He took the mic with a nod. "I've worked alongside these bulls," he said, voice calm but firm. "They're safer than most patrol dogs. And frankly, I trust Mason's judgment more than I trust a lot of people during a crisis." Applause broke out. After the demo, the crowd stuck around. Families snapped pictures of their kids near the bulls at a respectful distance. Volunteers passed out flyers on livestock safety, property rights, and certified training protocols. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. I overheard one councilwoman telling a reporter, "Honestly, this should be a regular thing. I'd rather come here than suffer through another HOA barbecue." Karen didn't stay. She slipped out before the last question was asked. The same way a magician disappears after the trick fails, But I wasn't quite done with her. I stepped back up to the platform and cleared my throat. "One last announcement before we wrap," I said. "I want to thank the person who inspired this event. Without their, let's call it, creative decision-making, I might never have realized how little our neighborhood understood about animal safety." A few chuckles from the crowd. "That's why I've decided to donate 10% of this year's training event profits to local livestock education programs, and I'll also be naming our new training enclosure in her honor. Welcome to the Karen Containment Zone." Laughter swept the field. Not mocking, just relieved. Collective release. Within days, someone painted the name onto a wooden sign and posted it near the edge of the training area. The HOA board even voted to make it officially a tongue-in-cheek reminder of what happens when entitlement meets livestock. Karen had become a local legend, but not in the way she'd wanted. Not out of cruelty, just consequences. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low over the field. Diesel lay beside me, snout twitching in his sleep, a quiet guardian. I knew Karen might still have a few petty moves left in her. People like her don't give up. But she'd already lost the three things she cared about most: control, credibility, and the illusion that she was untouchable. Everyone knew the truth now. I had bulls to train, a fence to maintain, and a town that finally understood what real protection looked like. No home memos, no power plays, just a whistle, some grit, and a few £1,000s of very persuasive livestock. 3 weeks had passed since the showcase. The crowds had gone, but the ripple effect lingered. The Karen Containment Zone sign had become a local attraction. People stopped to take selfies with it, sometimes laughing, sometimes shaking their heads at how one woman's ego became neighborhood folklore. I hadn't seen Karen since. Not directly, but her presence lingered, like the smell of ozone after a lightning strike. Then one late afternoon, she showed up. She was standing at my gate, arms folded. Her face was trying to look serious, but it landed somewhere between regret and rehearsed defiance. I leaned on the fence and waited. She didn't speak right away, just stood there staring, like she still couldn't believe how far the pendulum had swung, that the man she once dismissed as the cowboy next door was now the neighborhood's trusted figure, and she was the punchline. Finally, she spoke. "I came to talk," she said. "Not argue, just clear the air." I raised an eyebrow. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to see how far she'd go without prompting. She glanced over at Diesel, who lay by the barn gate, half asleep, not even giving her the dignity of acknowledgement. "Look," she continued, "I know things got out of hand, and maybe I wasn't entirely transparent with the hoe." I stayed silent. She fidgeted, then sighed. "Fine, I was wrong about the party, the fence, the way I handled everything. It spun out of control, and I didn't expect it to blow up like that." I let the moment breathe. "What exactly are you here for, Karen?" I asked. "An apology, or damage control?" She looked away, and for the first time, something like shame crossed her face. "Both, I guess. I don't expect you to forgive me, but this whole thing has ruined me, my reputation, my job. People whisper behind my back. My clients dropped me. I got kicked off committees I helped build. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything over one mistake." I stepped forward, resting my hand on the top rail of the fence. "One mistake?" I repeated. "Karen, this wasn't a misstep. This was the result of years of entitlement, of treating everyone else's property like your playground. You cut through a locked fence. You endangered children. You hijacked emergency power. And when it all blew up, you didn't apologize. You blamed me." She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished. "You didn't make a mistake. You made choices, one after another, and you only showed up now because those choices finally caught up to you." She went quiet. For once, there was no comeback, no flyers, no threats, just silence. And honestly, that said more than anything else she could have tried to say. Karen looked around, eyes darting as if searching for one last scrap of control, but there was nothing left. Eventually, she let out a slow breath. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You just going to let everyone keep mocking me forever?" I shrugged. "That's not up to me. You made yourself the main character. People are just reacting. If you want it to stop, maybe stop giving them new material." That landed. She winced like the truth had weight. I could tell she wanted to fire back, But for once, the words didn't come. The gate buzzed a delivery truck, another load of materials for the new training enclosure. I waved to the driver and turned back to her. "We're done here," I said. "Calm, final. I wish you luck, Karen." "I truly do. But I don't owe you anything, and not an apology, not a retraction, not silence." She didn't argue, just turned and walked away, her steps slower, heavier than when she arrived. For the first time, she didn't look like the villain. She looked like someone who had finally realized the world doesn't bend just because she demands it. In the days that followed, life eased back into a peaceful rhythm. The bulls returned to their drills. I accepted an offer from a regional security firm to host bi-monthly training seminars. Diesel, Tango, and Bruiser became part of a larger mission: educating, demonstrating, leading by presence. Calls started coming in from neighboring towns. People wanted to learn livestock handling, emergency protocols, even mentorships. What had once been a quiet patch of land scrutinized by the HOA had become a beacon of responsibility, of pride, of community. At the next home meeting, Karen's name conspicuously absent, I was invited to speak about property rights and animal safety. It was surreal, standing at the same podium where she once ranted about Shrub Heights. The new board president smiled as she introduced me. We figured it was time someone with actual experience helped shape our policy. Laughter. But I kept it practical. No gloating. I shared real advice, explained my systems, and even offered walkthroughs for anyone nervous about living near large animals. I didn't want praise, I just wanted peace. And then, one last surprise. 2 weeks later, the town mayor called. "We reviewed the footage," he said. "Talked with the council. The way you handled that situation, the restraint, clarity, professionalism. You didn't just protect your land, you taught this town something." He invited me to a community recognition ceremony, not for the bulls, not for the drama, but for turning chaos into clarity. At the event, Diesel stood next to me, a massive blue ribbon draped across his chest. He blinked at the cameras like they were mildly interesting grass. People cheered as I accepted the plaque, and I smiled, genuinely touched. But in the back of the crowd, I noticed her, Karen. She wasn't glaring, she wasn't plotting, she was just there, watching, arms crossed, no mask of superiority, just a quiet look I hadn't seen from her before. Regret, maybe, or finally, acceptance. She didn't speak, she didn't approach. She watched for a moment, then turned and melted back into the crowd. The sun dipped low as the event ended. I led Diesel back toward the barn. The breeze was soft, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I leaned on the fence and looked out over the land. Fences rebuilt, bulls calm, community stronger than ever. Karen had tried to tear it all down, out of ego, out of spite, but in the end, she built something else entirely. She gave me a platform, a voice, a legacy I never set out to create. She reminded everyone that respect isn't a title, it's a track record. Diesel snorted beside me and nudged my arm. "Yeah, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ear. "You deserve every bit of that ribbon." He turned toward the barn. No command needed. I followed slowly, pausing one last time by the wooden sign near the field. Karen containment zone. Still funny, still true, but no longer a warning. Now, it was a monument, a reminder of what happens when boundaries literal and personal get ignored. As I shut the barn doors for the night, I whispered a not to Karen, but to the land, the bulls, and maybe fate itself. That's how you end the party, with patience, with poise, and 3,000 pounds of poetic justice.